Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, PK Haddis. Returning to the show this week is Matt Miller, the Director of Mobility Transformation at Ecology Action. He's here to talk about a new route the local bicycle advocacy group and nonprofit stood up around the city of Santa Cruz last month. Some of you loyal riders may even have noticed one of the 160 yellow bikeway signs posted on street corners across the city. Matt is here to tell us about what purpose the route is meant to serve and what his team hopes to glean from this temporary pilot program. Matt also comes back on the show a little more than a year ago for an in-depth discussion of e-bikes across the Central Coast and state as a whole. So on the back half of today's show, we'll revisit that discussion to include the latest developments from both community adoption and local legislation lenses. Matt, welcome back to the show.
PK, thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Great to see you again.
Yeah.
Actually, let's start with your title, the Director of Mobility Transformation.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about what that means.
What is that? Yeah, I've been recently hearing, well, that sounds like a fancy title. Like, what's that all about?
Well, it's a director. That's a good
right.
start.
Yeah, the idea behind it really kind of came about, it's in the spirit of the work that I've been doing the last 8 years at Ecology Action. Before I had the title of program manager, I basically helped run projects and programs across a range of geographies, helping to advance bicycle transportation. And so the Director of Mobility Transformation came about after I helped lead a study visit to the Netherlands last summer.
Which we will definitely get into.
Yeah, which we can get into, where we took 9 different agencies from around Santa Cruz County and Monterey County to go to the Netherlands to look at how did they go from a car-dominated transportation system into essentially a mobility paradise where there is a reasonable, affordable, and abundant set of mobility options for people to get around, including walking and transit and driving, but also a whole lot of biking. And after that study visit, we came back and we were working with the different agencies that were part of the trip. And it was clear to them, and then they asked us, hey, we're going to need support in order to bridge the lessons learned to our local conditions. And so I basically, with the help of our organization, kind of reimagined a role and stepped into this new one in fall of last year to help really hold the vision for change and transformation from our current status quo into where we know we can get to.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's good to hear that, explanation of that journey from you because, again, the transformation is the key word, and I think it kind of gets to the heart of what we're going to talk about first today, which is this new bikeway route that you were, had an integral role, the main role in helping establish, in my understanding, across the city. Could you just tell us about what exactly the Santa Cruz Bikeway is? Yeah,
so a quick bit of context for like why even bother with something like the Bikeway. From my first day on the job back in 2017 at Ecology Action, we run a suite of programs from, youth walking and bike safe programs in local elementary schools to running bike to work day or bike month and the Biketober challenges. We helped set up the city's e-bike rebate program. We launched the county's e-bike rebate program just a couple months ago. So in total, we run a suite of programs designed to reduce or eliminate barriers that people may face in order to incorporate bicycling into their everyday life or active transportation, right? But the biggest and most persistent barrier that we hear about that we don't really have a whole lot of control in is the infrastructure. A lot of people say, I just don't feel safe out there. And so we can do rules of the road presentations, and we can give people helmets and work on bike repair and get people e-bikes and help with the financial picture and help with bike parking and bike to work programs. But at the end of the day, if people's A to B, getting from where they are to where they need to go, doesn't feel safe or comfortable, what real good, we're going to be working on the margins always. And so a big part of this work that definitely lives in the Santa Cruz Bikeway project is what are we in a position to do as an organization to help change people's relationship to infrastructure? We should also change the infrastructure, which we can get into. But this bikeway really stands as this is a non-obvious, but exists today option if you want to navigate by bike around the city of Santa Cruz on streets that aren't running around with high-speed traffic, cars going really close to you, conditions that the vast majority of people don't want to be in at all and have zero tolerance for, understandably. So the Bikeway was really us saying, how can we intervene to improve the conditions by which people can get around while we're waiting on some new infrastructure that the city is going to be installing in the years ahead. So that's a little bit of frame up of like why the Bikeway. What the Bikeway is it's an 11-mile segmented bike route that goes around the entire city of Santa Cruz. And it strings together multi-use paths and bicycle and pedestrian dedicated facilities with neighborhood streets, with little hidden gem connectors that connect dead-end roads that you might like have never even thought about because you don't drive there. But if you're walking or biking in that zone, you might realize. And stringing that together from like the micro neighborhood scale across the entire city to create an 11-mile route that all connects and allows you to hop on and hop off to get to some of your core destinations. And I think like the best way of wrapping your head around what this is, you know, in most neighborhoods, if you just do a mental map of where you live or where you have lived in the past, you probably know that little alleyway that connects over there, or maybe that little bridge that gets you across the creek. Like there's a lot of that type of lived experience that people have in their small neighborhoods, like maybe within a few block radius. So it's taking that concept and blowing it up to city size and then signing it and telling people about it over the course of a 2-month campaign to establish and socialize the route. Because once the signs come down, the route lives, right? All these things just physically exist in our space. And so if people know how to navigate it, they can continue to use and benefit from it.
Yeah, I think those are two key points about the route, which are number one, that it uses exclusively existing infrastructure, correct? So there's nothing that your team was. Of course, you'd have to jump through a bunch of hoops with the city of Santa Cruz.
We didn't pour concrete.
There was no concrete mixed or poured,
yeah.
in fact, for this route. Yeah. Just 160 or so signs, maybe.
Exactly.
Plus or minus.
And a website and, you know,
and a website,
digital
right.
campaign and stuff. Yeah.
Indeed. And so, and again, it's a pilot program, right? So tell us about when it started and how long it's going to last for.
Yeah, so we went live with this on August 8th. And it's going to run until October 8th. So 2 months total. Why 2 months? Why temporary pilot? Mostly because, you know, we're experimenting with it. Our hypothesis is that we'll put this route out there, share it with people, and it will be received well, and people will positively relate to it, and it'll be something that starts to be generative and helpful, right? But we don't know that for sure, so we're kind of doing the homework to figure it out. And then also the signs that we're using are good for a couple of months, but they're not permanent. You know, they're not permanent metal signs that are good for years to come. I think what we are aiming for is that we do this 2-month push. We get a lot of good feedback on it. We have a survey on our website, and we're able to conclude, you know, strongly that it's like a very well-received project and that people would like to see something like this permanently designated and installed. And then that would be fodder for us to go to the city and be like, hey, we did some homework. We did a little testing. Here's what we did. You know, we're giving you a head start. This is something that like city residents would really benefit from. And it's low lift and low cost relative to other types of, you know, infrastructure intervention.
Tell us more about the city's involvement in this process. Obviously, they're aware of it.
Yeah.
But, you know, if any old individual was just like, hey, I have an idea for, you know, let's say tomorrow I decided I had an idea for a countywide route.
Yeah.
I probably couldn't start just putting up signs. I mean, tell us about if there was any collaboration there, and seems like there's a bit of a, you know, you kind of got your bait out there, as you just mentioned,
right.
for them, you know, hoping it might inspire some perhaps permanent infrastructural changes.
Yeah.
Talk about that dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're friends and colleagues with all the local cities and have been for decades. Like, you know, my first boss at Ecology Action has been there for 30 years. He's been doing this work for a long time, right? So we've gone through generations of public works staff, and really we all have a shared vision for allowing people to move safely and sustainably around where we live and where we work and where we play, right? So conceptually, the city's like, yeah, this totally seems like a good concept. It's not something that's a high priority for us. You know, we've got the rail trail, we've got multi-use paths, we have, bike lane that we want to install on Water Street. We've got, now the city is looking at installing a temporary bike and pedestrian facility over the harbor while the Murray Street. I mean, they've got big stuff and really expensive and complicated things. So it's not so much that they're not against the concept. They're just like, this isn't a big priority for us. And so while we get it in concept, it's not something that we're going to try to do anytime soon. It's not also something that we have funding for. And so when we said, hey, what if we tested it and we did it with private donations? Well, is that something that we could test? And we went to try to get a permit and do it by the book and officially. But actually, at the end of the day, after months of trying, the city was like, we actually don't have a protocol for this. This isn't technically a construction project. This isn't technically a research project. It's not a event, like a one day or even a weekend event. It is just kind of in this in-between space of something that we don't really know what to handle. So they're like, you're on your own. All you can't, the only thing you can't do is don't physically install anything on the road. But if you want to promote a route and put up some yard signs and stuff like that, like, go for it.
You're using a few friends of Ecology Action with homes on the route.
Yeah.
Volunteered posts, outside their yard. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So we were able to pull some friends and supporters who happen to live on the route, and they're like, use our fence, and we'll put a yard sign up. And then actually, I ended up, at least on one occasion, while I was installing the route on the initial day, I had a guy just come out of his house and kind of asked, like, hey, what are you doing? And actually, kind of funny sidebar, a lot of people thought I worked for the city while I was installing the route, and they were asking me, they're like, hey, you're not busting me for parking, are you? And I was like, I am the furthest thing from parking enforcement. You don't have to worry about that. But this guy came up and he goes, hey, what are you doing? And I told him about the route and that showed him the signs and all the other options. And he was like, well, you got a big yard sign? Do you want to put one on, like, right here? I got a good spot. And I was like, I would love to, So met the guy right then and there, installed the sign, and it's still up,
Yeah, that's the second thing that I find interesting about this route which is that it was designed by you and your colleagues who I'm assuming all live here, all bike here regularly. So it's kind of a grassroots route in that way. You can kind of trust that the folks who design the route know what they're actually talking about in terms of safety and efficiency.
I would say, there's that like Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour rule. Like I would say that a lot of the people that are involved in this project are well beyond the 10,000 hour of like biking in this town, right? And kind of know the ins and outs and know the nuance.
10,000 miles. Maybe.
Yeah, also that. Also that. So it's well vetted. There are people that are, have a ton of lived experience and professional experience on kind of what makes a route like this work.
Are there any features? I don't know if you literally have a mental map in your head of this route, but could you give us a kind of a rundown of like where it actually takes us and what direction to start and stop? Like, can people? Obviously, they're not going to travel to start at the same spot. Right. You can just kind of start wherever. But give us an idea, roughly, if you can, of like where this thing actually goes.
So broad strokes of kind of the loop, right? Because the city of Santa Cruz, if you actually look at the city limits, like goes way up into UCSC and kind of goes out to the north coast and goes to the harbor. And so this loop is really like a core central loop around the lower part of the city. Like the highest up it goes is like Escalona, for example. So we'll kind of start there. So you get from our office downtown, off Church and Cedar, we would ride up Walnut Street and intersect with Escalona. And then the route, as we tinkered with this for a couple of years. And initially it actually had a bunch of private property cut-throughs that are like a community staple. Again, there's a church parking lot over in Prospect Heights that actually has a physically installed route that says safe route to school. So it is something for De La Viega Elementary. And that was something that was done from maybe 20 years ago. It's kind of a handshake deal between the city at the time and the church owner, or the church manager. And so there are things like that go through a private parking lot that everybody uses and knows. But when we were trying to, lean this towards the more official direction, we got to those private properties and we're like, oh, we should let them know that we're trying to do this and ask them about it. And we just didn't reach two of the three private property owners because one was like a HOA on the river and there were like 15 different names and nobody really knew anything. The Berkeley Court HOA conceptually we're like, that's really cool. We are very much in support of a bike route around the city, but we just don't really want to direct extra traffic down our street. So like, thanks, but no thanks. Completely understandable. It's totally well within their right. It's a private road. So what we ended up doing is we routed totally on public right-of-way, public roads, public paths. And because of that, the route really is optimized to ride counterclockwise, because there are some turns that you have to make that if you're riding it clockwise, you'd have to kind of go across 2 lanes of traffic and then almost immediately cross it again to go back onto another side street. So there were just a couple awkward pieces. So back to where we kind of, to orient to the loop, go up on Escalona. You traverse all of Escalona from Highland over by the Abbey, like base of High Street. And then you go across Escalona all the way to Arroyo Seco on the west side. Then you drop down to Grandview, you hook around, you cross Highway 1 onto Swift Street, and then you pick up the West Side Rail Trail, the rail trail that's been there for a few years already. You ride that through the west side by New Leaf and the Parish, and pop onto Bay Street. And then you do that little jog onto the newest section of rail trail that was just, the ribbon cutting was in May. Take that nice 2% grade all the way down to the Santa Cruz Wharf. Then you're kind of, especially this time of year, you're like in a real chaotic zone, right? 9 months out of the year, it's peaceful down there. In the summertime, you have to be extremely heads up, because it's like every single person there is like doing it for the first time. They don't know where they're at, right? Which, as somebody who's been like commuting in this town for 16 years, it's almost like a Zen meditation. You're like, I have to assume that the person that I'm about to interact with just doesn't know that they're walking in a bike lane right now, and they're going to like run around with their kids or something like that, right? So that's
a bicyclist mentality if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, so you just have to take it with a grain and some patience. But then you proceed along the boardwalk, you cross over the San Lorenzo River, and then you do something that catches most people off guard. A lot of people go right at the top of that little sidewalk and then kind of proceed to Betty's Burgers and would maybe make their way across the harbor. But this route actually takes a left and does that little crosswalk right there on East Cliff to get onto Hiawatha. And then there's a little known cut through that connects it to the bottom of Cayuga Street. On Cayuga, you make your way through the Seabright neighborhood. Cayuga is a nice wide road. There's now bike lanes on it. And you take it up to Wyndham, and then you use Wyndham to get across Seabright Avenue. And what I want to point out too is that like this is an imperfect route. It is a best of what we've got, but there are crossing sections that we call cross with care segments that are really like you're on the route and you have to cross a feature or a arterial or busy road where the car speed and the car volume is high. So you gotta be heads up. You can do it safely, but it's not like you aren't completely unexposed on this route. You just are greatly reduced. Make your way across Seabright, and then you go into Arana Gulch. You exit out of the north, and then you kind of go into another part that a lot of people don't really know about. You go onto Parkway by Whaler's Car Wash, and it looks like you're just heading into a dead-end neighborhood where Highway 1 is. And then you do this little bicycle and pedestrian cut-through that connects Parkway right by the Santa Cruz Adult School over to La Fonda and over by Harbor High. And then you ride up La Fonda into the Prospect Heights neighborhood. And then you are on kind of this safe route to school route that parallels Prospect Heights and Morrissey that feeds right into the back of De La Viega Elementary. Mm-hmm. You get over to Goss Avenue. You keep running parallel to Highway 1, and then you cross over Highway 1 on the Morrissey or on the Branciforte Bridge before turning off onto Linden Street, which is a parallel path to Branciforte with a fraction of the traffic. And it's like a very neighborly feel. There's a lot of good people out there. There's like a lot of dogs and waving, and it's a good scene. And then it gets a little twisty and turny, a little complicated from there. You go down Berkeley Way, you cross over a bicycle and pedestrian bridge over Branciforte Creek. You get to May Avenue. You take May across Water Street by Dig, where they have all the cool plants and like O'Reilly's and that whole zone. Then you go all the way up to Dakota, and then you cross Ocean Street, where there's another rectangular flashing beacon and a high visibility crosswalk there. So you can actually push the button, hit the lights, and then drivers, if they're not stopping for you already, that's a good way to get their attention. And then you go right by the Paradox into San Lorenzo Park, and then you're on the bike path, and you go north, over to Felker Street. You hook over the bridge. You go by Cost Plus and the New Leaf and Chipotle. Behind the Sash Mill, over by Patagonia, and then you go up that little, also relatively little known, if you know, you know, but a lot of people don't know that you can go to the Sash Mill, and then there's a bicycle and pedestrian path that connects you to what we like to call endearingly the Squiggle Bridge, which is the bicycle and pedestrian path that goes over Highway 1. And then you're at the bottom of High Street, and then you just do a little jog and you're at Escalona, and there you have the loop.
It's like we have Google Maps come to life right in front of my eyes.
Yeah,
that was perfect. If you're just joining us, you are listening to KSQD's Talk of the Bay, 89.5, 89.7, 90.7 FM. I'm your host, PK Haddis, and I'm joined today by Matt Miller, Director of Mobility Transformation at Ecology Action. We're talking about the Santa Cruz Bikeway. Bikeway Santa Cruz?
Santa Cruz Bikeway.
Santa Cruz Bikeway. That was just put up by Ecology Action last month, and it's going to last through early October, August 8th to October 8th. In fact, it's a 2-month pilot program. We're going to keep talking about this for a little while longer, and then on the back half of the show, we're going to talk about e-bikes and just kind of bicycle transit more broadly. So as I mentioned, this was launched August 8th, which means you've had almost a month. Have you looked at any results? Like, what's been the reception, either hard results from people taking the survey online or just sort of like feedback generally? What's the reception been like?
Yeah, like social feedback so far has been overwhelmingly positive, and I would say even surprisingly so. You know, anytime you step into the public domain with a project, even if you believe in it so wholeheartedly, it's inevitable that somebody's going to find a way to pick it apart. And there hasn't really been a lot of that yet. Or if it has, it hasn't reached me. But I've been kind of plugged into all of the things. So far what we've gathered are people are like, absolutely. This makes so much sense. We want a reasonable, low stress way to get around. And we want alternatives to the busy car roads that most people are familiar with getting across town. And so people are like, we want this. We want more things like it. We support low-stress biking. We think it's awesome. The main critique I've gotten so far is, why is it only 2 months? Why are you going to take the signs down? Just leave it in place, you know? So that's kind of some of the critique we've gotten so far. We have, we thought about, when standing up this pilot, doing a more sophisticated kind of scientific investigation where we were going to set up counters on the route and do pre and post bike counts. But the cost was fairly prohibitive, and it escalated the complexity pretty considerably. And so we ended up taking that down, and we have sort of these other proxies for measuring engagement. You know, we have web traffic, we have the QR codes that are physically on the signs. And as of this morning, we're up to like 685 unique scans of the QR code, which people are interacting with out on the route. So that's pretty good for, 3.5 weeks. We've got video impressions and video views that are north of 5,000. So social media, it's been kind of spreading around. We've got a lot of people that are helping out with it. The surveys, for anybody listening out there, we need more survey feedback. So the surveys were conceived as a way to both sort of quantify and qualify what exactly the benefit of this route is. Like, a lot of people could be like, cool, low stress biking, like all for it, 2 thumbs up. But we really need something at the end of this project to lean on, to say people felt safer on this route versus the alternative. People rode their bikes more often as a result of having a safe place to ride than baseline. Like, we need those nuggets out of this to really, I think, point to, hey, this is something of value that should be looked at more long term. And so for anybody out there who's curious, or maybe you've already ridden the route, on our website, santacruzbikeway.org, there's a survey at the end that's a rider survey where you can let us know what you think. And if you know anybody who has, tell them about it as well. But that's going to be probably our most satisfying distillate at the end of this, other than just like community sharing and a lot of positivity out there, and people are like, this is so cool and I love it. I love feelings, love the good vibes, and we're going to need some numbers and some real survey feedback to kind of take it to the next step, where we would ideally, talk to the city about, hey, we've done some homework. You got a head start. This might be worth looking into in the short term.
Right. So that's sort of one of my final questions on this, which is like, obviously the goal is to get it's a short-term project.
Right.
The goal is to get some long-term changes. And so I'm wondering if you could put together, maybe it's too early, maybe you really are just waiting for some guidance from the community based off of the survey and any feedback you get in this 2 months. But that being said, I'm sure you have some ideas for what would be helpful around the city to make a route like this viable, or at least to create low traffic alternatives or low traffic routes for bicyclists. So if you could put together a wish list now to give to the city, and that they could implement to create some positive changes in your mind, what are some of those?
Well, I want to definitely give credit where credit's due. The city took it upon themselves to go out and get grant funding to do an update to their active transportation plan, which they're kind of in the last stages of. They did a lot of outreach in the spring and early summer, which really looks at, hey, community, how can we, the city, make active transportation easier and safer for you? What are the types of things that would make it easier for you on a day-to-day basis? What types of infrastructure, what types of programs, what policies, just kind of open book. What do you got? And so there's a lot of really good material in there that I think we'll get to see when it's kind of concluded and summarized. With regard to this route in particular, the part of the inspiration for a model like this, I don't know if you've ever been to San Francisco and ridden the Wiggle, but the San Francisco Wiggle, Google it later. It's a
Sounds
thing.
like a dance move.
Yeah, right. It could just be just about anything. But the San Francisco Wiggle, the bike route. I can't speak for any dance moves or other things out there, but the Wiggle, it basically provides, like the name implies, a wiggle route through the city that kind of avoids hills and avoids some of the busier streets. And it's completely, when you're on the Wiggle, you're on it because there are greenback sharrows and road signs, and also a near constant stream of bike riders. So when you're on that, you're on the right path if you're on bike. Ideally, what would be cool to find here is if the positivity continues and people are like, yeah, we'd like something like this, at least as an interim growth stage. I mean, I haven't said this yet, but what I want to also preface this whole effort with is I hope in a few years it's not even relevant. Like, I would like a curated route that we've spent literally years trying to fine tune. It's just not even relevant because anywhere you might want to go, there's just safe bike infrastructure for you to do it, right? That's the goal, really. That's the long-term goal, is that you don't have to do all this specialty work. It's basically a given that if we have public-owned right-of-way, and the goal of that right-of-way is to move people and goods around and exchange commerce and exchange ideas and community, that part of that picture is safe travel by non-car modes, right? That biking is straightforward. Because especially for short trips, 1, 2, 3, 4 miles, not to mention e-bikes, which we'll talk about next, which then is like 5, 6, 7, 8 miles, you are talking about a massive amount of vehicle trips that could just be like gone overnight if the infrastructure was in place to support it. People are looking for value. They're looking for time savings. They're looking for good use of their time. People like moving their bodies. People like having more affordable options. But what people mostly aren't willing to do is risk their life or put themselves in discomfort. So this route would be great to do for the next few years, and then maybe it just like gets taken down because there's bike infrastructure everywhere, right? That's the vision.
The Director of Mobility Transformation, everybody. Sounds like a perfect fit to me. We've been talking with Matt Miller, again, the Director of Mobility Transformation at Ecology Action, here on KSQD's Talk of the Bay. We've been talking about the Bikeway Santa Cruz that was established, again, just for everybody's reference. It'll be up from August 8th to October 8th, an 11-mile route, sort of circling around the entire city of Santa Cruz. Matt actually joins us for the second time since I've been hosting, and almost a year ago he was on the show in August of 2024, and we discussed almost exclusively e-bikes, and so I figured it was worth dedicating the second half of this show almost exclusively to e-bikes, just with a reiteration of what we discussed to some degree, but also some updates. A lot can happen in a year, and a lot has happened in a year. First, I think it would be good to lay the groundwork for what we're actually talking about when we talk about e-bikes. So could you give us just kind of a brief rundown of what an e-bike actually is and what it is not? Because as I understand it, that's actually a key thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. So definitionally, e-bikes, the ones we're talking about, are a legally classified 3 e-bike class system. There are Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 e-bikes in the United States. Class 1 e-bikes have a motor with pedal assist, which means that the motor only helps you if you are also doing work, and that motor assists up to 20 miles per hour. You have Class 2 e-bikes, which is what you see a lot of out there, and like what a lot of the middle and high school youth are riding these days, which we'll get to. Class 2 e-bikes have pedal assist and throttle assist up to 20 miles per hour. And then you have Class 3 e-bikes, which are pedal assist only. There's no throttle. And the pedal assist goes up to 28 miles an hour. And then the motor cuts out. And there's sort of a way that this gets described as like these bikes have max speeds of 20 or 28. And that is to say the motor has a maximum assist speed. You can take the bike faster than 20 or 28 depending on your circumstance, right? But there's a little nuance in there. So those are the 3 legally classified types of e-bikes. And then, as we'll get into, there is now really a fastly growing preponderance of electric motorcycles, or e-motos, that are kind of flooding the scene. And these are technically not street legal electric motorcycles that are capable of going well in excess of 30 miles an hour, have very powerful motors, have no pedals, and it's all throttle. And like, there's definitely a wee factor. There's a lot of people who are like, wow, that's really fun. It's like riding a motorcycle. But it's getting kind of conflated and referred to as e-bikes, which then makes that whole picture of, well, we have a problem on our hands with e-bikes. Yes, partially. We really have a major issue with e-motos that are going very fast and are often, not always, but often combined with behavior like running stop signs and stoplights and doing wheelies and riding on sidewalks and generally causing a little bit of chaos out there in the world. So the whole bucket of e-bikes kind of gets pinned as like, we got to do something about those, right? So there's a little confusion out there.
Indeed. Those bikes, if I'm following you correctly, they really do look like dirt bikes.
They look like dirt bikes.
Electric dirt bikes. And so that's one way our listeners might recognize them. Maybe they recognized it just as well based off of your description and the speed and the behaviors. But they really do look like dirt bikes.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about, I'm not sure if you know the hard data, in your head here, but what can you tell me about in Santa Cruz County and the Central Coast? Because I know Ecology Action, my understanding, you obviously branch out a bit from the county here, and a lot of our listeners go all the way down to Monterey County.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about adoption? Like, who is actually using the legal e-bikes we're talking about, e-bikes. The 1, 2, or 3, class 1, 2, or 3? Like, do you have a sense of if it's a lot of younger youth, under 18, maybe middle age, above 18, or even elderly folks? Like, who's using these e-bikes?
Yeah, so I don't have hard data to share or to look at. I have, basically other journalists and reporting on trends around e-bikes and then lots of plenty of observational and anecdotal data, and then just years of being involved in the industry and the space. Adoption is happening across the spectrum. You have 11-year-olds, riding to middle school on e-bikes because their older sibling or their friend or the broader community writ large. It's like just in the last 3 school years, it's gone from a couple kids to probably more than 50%. And you could just do a rough sketch, go to any school bike rack at, outside, and you can just look at the raw total and do an inventory yourself. So that has been remarkable, that adoption in the youth, like middle and high school locally, very readily observable. And then also just, you can hear it in conversations with parents and with, policymakers and public works staff. Everyone's kind of like, what are we doing about those? Like, the amount of times I've heard, what are we doing about those youths on e-bikes in the last year? Like, if I had 5 cents for every time I've heard that, like, I would have at least a couple $100, right? But it's a big deal. And then, from there, you've got college students, right? In my previous role, we did a lot of work at UCSC. So there has been a dramatic growth of e-bikes observed and seen up at UCSC, which makes total sense given the context. It's a hilly campus. It's hard to get around. It's really expensive to have a car. The buses run often. They are also often very full. And most people like to have their own independent device to get around, right? So like the same reason that you would like a car, a lot of people like bikes for the same reason. You can come and go at your timeline. You can park relatively easily, except it's more affordable. It's easier to get places. So you've got that band of college students, very popular. Then you kind of go into, 20s, 30s, young professionals, maybe young families. Also noticeable upticks in the amount of utility e-bikes and cargo e-bikes and family haulers and commuter e-bikes. Again, readily observable at businesses downtown, outside of grocery stores, that kind of thing. And then certainly, like from my own personal experience and then also talking to people, the amount of folks who might, without e-bikes, age out of biking because of balance or stamina or just like the feeling of like, I can't do this again, or I can't do this alone. It's extending that by years, if not decades. People are feeling like I can actually stay out on my e-bike and it's easy for me and it's actually fun. And like, I know, I happen to know this one volunteer of ours who's been, she's been volunteering for like 15 years. She's a retired nurse in her, she's 77 or 78. And she is part of a cohort of women that are all in their 70s and 80s, and they get out for like multiple rides a week, and they're all on e-bikes. And she, quite strongly says to me, like, Matt, you have to understand, if I didn't have this e-bike, I would have stopped biking years ago. She's like, it is the assist, it is going up the hills, it is the distance, it's keeping up with my friends. So really, like, across the board, e-bikes are being adopted by kind of all ages and backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. And we've been seeing that trend since like 2017, 2018, would you say, or maybe even earlier, or
no,
a bit later?
I would say that things really started ratcheting up during COVID. Like we were seeing year over year growth. Like I kind of started when I was here on the show last year, I talked about how like my awareness of e-bikes really started in 2018. And that was when Jump came to town and we had e-bike share. And then I tried that on a variety of routes that I had done hundreds of times under my own power. And I was like, wow, I could do this faster and not sweat as much and carry more. Like, wow. And so really then from 2018, 2019, steady growth, 2020, and then like the COVID bike boom. The COVID bike boom happened across category, but the biggest boom happened with e-bikes. Mm-hmm. And I think now what we're seeing in the last 2 or 3 years is just a kind of a mainstream maturation of the market. Like you have all types of people who are just like, oh yeah, e-bikes, they completely make sense for a range of my lifestyle needs. Mm-hmm. My kids getting to school, I'm like running to the store, or I'm like doing a fun ride after work, or I'm commuting, or I've got kid hauling. So I think there were early adopters in the 2018, 2019, and then like 2020, 2021, wildfire. And now it's just kind of like you hear terms like rad runners, which are those small 20-inch wheel class 2 e-bikes that are at most high schools these days. A lot of parents and administrators at schools will be like, those are standard issue. Standard issue. Mm-hmm. E-bikes are standard issue. Like it's worth pausing on that for a moment, because years ago we would have been like, we have this potentially really exciting technology that could change things. And it's just happened. It's like happening. you have kids coming of age, reaching 16, and they're like, I don't need a driver's license. I've got an e-bike. It's cheaper. It's way easier. It's less responsibility. Also doesn't have all the like licensing and permit and insurance and the cost. And it's like, that is really, I mean, in general, like that's all something that we should be like, that's really cool. As a person who works for an organization advancing community climate solutions, the fact that there's a technology that just arrived that somewhat organically has spread to the degree that it has and has durability. It wasn't just like a trend that lasted 6 months that people are like, oh, this is just like absolutely a good way to get around. And it's now permanently a part of the mix. Like that's something that we should be exploring all avenues to support as much as we can of that, because that's, you know, that kind of change in that timeline is very significant.
Again, I just wanted to emphasize adoption appears to largely, you mentioned this, the Class 2 e-bikes. So those are the ones that folks are seeing more of around town. So that's limited to a top speed of 20 miles per hour with a pedal and throttle assist option.
Correct.
So the last time we talked, again, August 2024, it felt like, correct me if I'm wrong here, it felt like adoption was far outpacing legislation.
Yeah.
Or, the lawmakers were a few steps or a few pedals behind the adopters.
Yeah.
Has that shifted in the past year? Like maybe locally we could start with, or even, I don't know if you're aware of state conversations, but where are things trending? Are they starting to catch up, or is it still a gap?
There is definitely some catch up happening. Yeah. I don't remember the legislation numbers off the top of my head, but there's like two main ones that have happened in the last year. One is basically a legislation to research e-bikes, to like really understand how to inform future policy.
We're talking state here?
State. This is state level. And it's actually through the Mineta Institute, through San Jose State, the Mineta Transportation Institute. So there's a group of researchers, including some colleagues of mine in that program, we're basically looking at like, what do we need to know about how to work with e-bikes long term? And so that's due January of 2026. And that'll be kind of like, in theory, it will provide us with hopefully a clear-eyed, research-backed, objective, standpoint on like, what's the best way to manage e-bikes in our transportation system. And hopefully with a little bit of a future focus on like, how do we adapt our transportation system for this technology that's probably not going anywhere. So there's that. There's also Marin County up above San Francisco. They got a special legislation passed to basically run a pilot and do their own regulations that would normally be a state level piece of policy. They're doing a test where I think it was anyone under 16 are unable to ride an e-bike. And it might be that under 16, you're not able to ride a Class 2. Basically, they zeroed in on that 16 years old and just said, like, we're going to greatly restrict or entirely restrict e-bike use under that age. And they're doing some testing with that, and they're supposed to come back to the state legislature and be like, here's our pilot, and here's what we found. There's a lot of people in this space right now who are, I think, somewhat reasonably, but also somewhat hurriedly saying, like, we should just cut out anyone under 14 or anyone under 15. Like, their brains haven't developed and they're irresponsible and they're risk prone. And, it's like, and just like, look at that 15-year-old looking person who just ran the stop sign. It must be all of them. And that's kind of their approach to policy. And it's like, okay, something in there, sure. Some strong gut feeling, some like reasonable understanding of psychology. Like, yeah, there's a lot to that. And we also should look and really study it, right? Because just saying like universally everyone under 15 are, running the stop signs and they're all a problem probably is not true, because like that just seems like too good to be true, right? And I've met some of those high schoolers who are like, no, we're just reasonable people who love e-bikes and it's really easy for us to get around. And we're not just running around causing mayhem. Like, yeah, there are some of those, but not all of us. Some of us are just like trying to live our lives. Let us live our lives. Right. So there's two kind of state level legislation that I think, so 2026, really, this is what's leading up to this, is like 2026 will be a year where I think we have more far reaching conversations and potentially legislation that comes through that sets a bit more of what our paradigm in California is going to be with regard to e-bikes. And then trickling down to the local level, again, because it seems like you can't go most days without hearing somebody say something about e-bikes or youths on e-bikes or running stop signs, or, So there's 2 city councils in the last several months that have really waded into this conversation. Capitola was the first one. Basically what they did is they had their city manager draft some conceptual regulations that the city could get on board with, and then take that to their state representatives and say, hey, in concept, these are the types of regulations that we as a city would get behind. So it's not something that they are in a position to actually do because they don't have that authority, but they're like, we've thought about it. We think this would work. And then they, in council in April, said, here's a letter that we want our mayor to send to our state representatives. And it approved unanimously. And what it contained was, I think, had some good elements and had some elements that, again, I think we're a little bit hurried. And I'll just kind of walk through what those are. So one contemplates this age thing. And the way that Capitola went with it is they were like, we think that anyone under 14 should not ride Class 2 e-bikes, like full stop. Anyone between 14 and 16 should have to go through some kind of a permitting or licensing test to make sure that they're safe and ready to go. So they really looked at like, let's have these age cutoffs for specific e-bike use. And one thing I want to circle back to really briefly is that even though observationally we're seeing a lot of Class 2 e-bikes on the local roads around Santa Cruz, I wanted to really, I did a little bit of look into like, what is the relative share of e-bike sales, Class 2 versus Class 1 and Class 3. Class 1 far and above there's more Class 1 e-bikes sold than Class 2 or Class 3. Class 3, I think, is somewhere between 20 and 30%. And then that's Class 2. And then Class 3 is even smaller percentage.
And Class 1, as a reminder, is limited to top speed of 20 miles an hour and a pedal assist only, which is the difference between Class 2.
Right.
Class 2 has a throttle as well.
Has a throttle also. Yeah. So Capitola contemplated the age. Then they looked at this permitting or licensing requirement, kind of akin to what you would do with driver's ed. Basically the assumption being if people don't have, and this is also an interesting point for us to think about as a community. The only formal way that we learn rules of the road is through driver's education. If you're not a driver, either because you choose not to be, or you can't for some reason, or you're not 16 yet, or some other life circumstance disallows you from going through driver's ed, the rest of you is just like, you have to go and search for that information yourself. Maybe you have parents or caretakers who imbue that, teach you that. Maybe it happens in school, but there is no formal way by which you learn rules of the road. So that also is a stark reminder of like, we're like, hey, everyone navigates. Everyone's a pedestrian at various points when they're getting in and out of their car. People ride their bikes. People use transit. People drive. But the only formal instruction that we're going to have around how to navigate the system is through driver's ed. Everyone else, you're on your own. And that, I think, leaves us vulnerable to, and I think what a lot of people are getting at in this conversation is there's all these young people who don't have driver's licenses who have no idea what the rules of the road are, And so they're trying to recreate driver's ed for this e-bike use case, which I think there's some validity to, right? Like, yeah, we should have education for traffic, rules of the road for everybody, because everybody has to navigate it at some point and to some degree. So the last part is that they, which we were helpful in kind of helping steer this direction, is like, hey, let's let's fill that gap. So let's advocate for universal traffic safety education in schools as part of a core curriculum, because like our team does it electively. If a teacher says, hey, we'd like you to come in, there's other classes that don't get that. So you just have this disparity of some getting, rules of the road training and understanding what to do and others not. And so that's kind of Capitola. They sent that letter off to the state. We'll see where that goes. The city of Santa Cruz, I know we're running out of time. City of Santa Cruz is the council in April of this year basically asked staff, we want a full workup on e-bikes. We want to know everything we need to know to really inform our next steps. We want policy recommendations. We want thoughts on education, on enforcement, on messaging and communication, on safety campaigns. So they're basically like, we want to fully wrestle with this thing. And so staff are in the throes right now of assembling what that picture is for the city of Santa Cruz. And they'll be coming back to council sometime soon to talk that through.
So we have so little time to explain this, but I really want to get this question in, which is, why do local authorities have so little say in regulating e-bikes? Do you know that part of that? Why
it's all California Vehicle Code. Yeah. So basically, when it comes to
e-bikes are classified, meaning e-bikes are classified.
Yeah, they're technically, they're sort of classified and regulated through the vehicle code. Mm-hmm. And so things like where, so like a local jurisdiction has jurisdiction over like a sidewalk, but if it's the physical roadway, that's state.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. We saw this play out with the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors about a year or so ago, also, where they outlawed I would have to look this up, but essentially riding on sidewalks, as you just mentioned. Right. They had authority over that, but not the actual roads. So they did what they can as sort of symbolic, but also making, doing what they can where they can.
Yeah.
And wow, just an incredibly interesting and also sort of bottomless subject to explore. And so we'll just have to have you on back again before a year's time, hopefully, because there really is a lot of community interest and a lot of different directions to go with this. But that's been Matt Miller. I just went with Matthew there at the end.
That is my full name.
Yeah, there you go. Matthew Miller, Director of Mobility Transformation at Ecology Action. We've been talking all things bicycles, the Bikeway, Santa Cruz Bikeway, which will be open until early next month. Matt, thank you so much for joining us to talk to the Bay today.
Appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
All right. And we are going to sign off. Thank you all for tuning in. We will see you tomorrow.